future of healthcare has arrived. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are transforming the practice of medicine and improving patient outcomes. This is Smarter Healthcare with AI. Conversations with Dr. Hassan Tetteh as he shares insights into the healthcare of tomorrow and how we can help create it today.
I'm back with retired Lieutenant General Jack Shanahan. We've been discussing his remarkable 36-year career of service in the Air Force and how he spearheaded the efforts to accelerate the ethical adoption of AI to transform military operations. General Shanahan, thinking about the challenges we broke down in part one in our lively discussion and the issues you dealt with as the first director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, as a leader, what would you say to other leaders trying to deliver better healthcare to individuals using AI?
The first thing I would say is you have to start not only dipping your toe into the deep end of the pool, you have to dive into the deep end of the pool. There's no time better than the present to jump in and say, what is out there that I can get smarter? Now, there's an intimidation factor here. There's no question about it. There is this hype about AI that generally is harmful in that it gives an impression that it's better than it is. And what it sometimes belies is the complexity of what it takes to get an AI project up and going, including, and maybe even especially in the healthcare side, which includes things like digitizing records and going electronically and making sure that there's still a human involved in the actual interaction with the patient somewhere along the way. But there's no time better than the present. And I'll tell you, for some that are wondering, should they do this, your competitors are going to do it. And people will go elsewhere because at some point, it will get better and better, and it will show that it's being effective. But what you're getting at, Hassan, is really this dilemma that we had in all of our projects at the Jake, what I call the return on investment conversation. How do I prove it's worth investing in this when I don't see necessarily the results yet? Because the technology is still novel enough. There aren't a lot of, well, back then there weren't a lot of concrete examples. There's a heck of a lot more concrete examples today than there were back then of success stories. But there's also a lot of stories of failure. So there will be people that are still a little discouraged about trying this because they see the bad things that happen. But here's what's going to happen if you don't do it. You're just going to be overwhelmed. You're going to miss things. You're going to make mistakes like humans, doctors, and nurses make mistakes every single day of the year. And it's not to say that machines are incapable of doing bad things or flawed decisions or recommendations or whatever. But what I would like to see is what we used to talk about in the Jake all the time, is giving more time back to the human. What I sort of the vision I have is pulling ourselves away from the trees to stand outside the forest and say, now I understand more about the context, because the machine did what would have taken me 4 days and did it in 30 seconds. That gives me more time back. The more time I have as a human to think about the consequences of what I am about to recommend, put myself in a physician or a nurse practitioner, whatever it is, LPN, making a recommendation. You want the best available information, and you also need it to be double and triple checked. And I actually think the machine can help and say, hey, I want to prescribe this to this individual. And you could have a very helpful reply saying, based on this patient's records, you ought to think very carefully about that for these reasons, these contraindications, whatever the right terminology is that you have to be careful about. I think that's a real value in here. When it all comes down to it, I think a human patient wants somewhere in this process a human sitting across from them. And maybe it's in that final piece of all of this, but they want to get that contact, that interaction. And the more the machine can take care of sort of the drudge work, the dirty work, the dangerous work, and automate all that, then the humans will have more time. So that to me is a lot of this is give me some time back to do more. And I think there is a risk here. And one of the risks I'll point out, and I think you probably see it already every day, is the people that are getting enamored with large language models and generative AI that say, I don't need to go to the doctor. I have a doctor right in front of me machine. Careful, time out, careful, be very careful about that internet solution that you think may have found what's wrong with you. Not a bad starting point, but at some point, get yourself to a human being and now begin the process of working with that human and machine together.
I couldn't agree with you more. You know, one of my most memorable times at the Jake, and one of the special moments with with working with you and the team was when I had the opportunity through a series of serendipitous events to bring you into the operating room outside of the J, that you could see what I was doing and what I did in my active practice of cardiac surgery. And, fortunately.
Can I jump on that? So I'll never forget that day ever. And I want to thank you sort of in person in this virtual environment again for what you did with us. So Hassan, you took a group of us over to watch basically open heart surgery, sitting from above, looking down, and I was blown away. I was just amazed at the complexity of the operation, how cool, calm, and collected people were. And as I said, I learned that day, I already suspected this, that cardiothoracic surgeons are the fighter pilots of the medical community with egos and arrogance to match. But that I'm just being a little facetious, but it was so unbelievably professional and just everything was coming together and all these people working their specific roles and responsibilities. But I'll never forget this, because you were sitting there going, imagine if we can bring AI into this right there, and AI into this piece right there, and AI into that piece right there. How much better could that process go? I mean, you're talking about truly, in a literal sense here, a life and death procedure, and AI can help with that. I'll never forget that day. I was just so wowed by everything I saw that I go, now I know why this is so important in context of an operating room.
And I'll tell you what I got from that, not only because I was, blessed and honored for you guys in your presence to be there in my environment that I love and that I lived, all my days of my life here. But I got an opportunity to see that excitement in your faces and see it light up and think to myself, not many people, believe it or not, throughout their entire medical training get to see open heart surgery. I mean, if you go through a surgery rotation, as many people have to do as medical students, you'll be lucky if you get to do open heart surgery or get to see it, because you may not have the opportunity to rotate on the thoracic surgery service. So you got to see something that, many of us don't get to see. I got to see it at a very early stage in my medical training and career. And I said, that's what I want to do when I grow up. But likewise, I, as a military person, came to appreciate and know about, your analogy about the fighter pilots of the military and the cardiac surgeons of medicine, because my very first duty assignment was on an operational forward deployed duty assignment. My very first one was being ship surgeon as a general surgeon on board the Carl Vinson CVN-70, forward deploy, and I got to live literally underneath the catapult of the flight deck. And so every time one of those ships launched, my rack would just like this.
Oh yeah.
But I get to live, I get to eat, I get to spend time, I get to talk and conversate and appreciate and really just, be enamored by these fighter pilots and their level of expertise, their level of just absolute human performance to the tilt, and learn about what they needed to do to get to where they were at that highest level of performance. And I remember at one point you turned to me while we were in the operating room and you were looking at all of this and you said, well, how long do you have to go to school to do this? And I think my colleague was there. He interrupted and chimed in for me. It was like, whoa, it's like a decade after you graduate from medical school to even be in that position. So,
well, it wasn't just your colleague. It was the doctor that had just come off the surgery, and he comes upstairs, very gracious of him. And he is so calm. I'll tell you, in a lot of flights that we would have, by the time we landed, we're pumped up, our adrenaline's going. He's just like, yep, got another one under the belt here. And that patient's got to be, I was stunned by the patient was going to go home in 2 days. And this is after they had a lung replacement followed by open heart surgery. I'm just going, it's incredible. I mean, it's hard to put into terms. So it was one of those. And by the way, you mentioned forward deploy, and I do want to point out your other focus while you were there at the Jake was how do we improve battlefield care as well? Everything from how can we bring in drones to bring plasma to the battlefield even faster. So there's this administrative part of healthcare that has to be tackled with AI, but there's this really trauma piece as well. And then trauma, of course, happens every day at every hospital across the United States. But in battlefield care, you throw in additional really hard factors to deal with. And so you were coming up with I love the ideas. I don't know what came out of them, but there was a lot that we would do to identify wounds and send it back to somebody that could review it. remotely and then bring in drones to help the patient out. I mean, that kind of stuff is really PhD level, in addition to all the sort of day-to-day quotidian sort of administrative things that can be helped by AI. So thanks for that too.
Well, one of the things that we did at the Jake, and I know you appreciated this across all of the different domains and the missions that we were running, was the fact that we were able to take something at the abstract, right? We were introduced to technology. We were forging this new tool of AI, and we're trying to propagate it across the department to improve all of its areas, right? And one of the things that I now appreciate, especially stepping back and having the time and seeing, sort of from this prehistoric time of 2018, 2019, all through, where we are right now, and large language models, deterministic AI, general AI, all of these things. It's that the fact is we had been at this stage in history for the department where we were taking applications, we were taking tools, we were taking solutions, and we were delivering them to people at the point of care, in my case, for warfighter health. But we were delivering tools into the hands of people, and they were taking those tools, those AI solutions, and they were using them to do their jobs better. I want you, if you could, because we took so much, pilots, we took so much, concepts, but we delivered things and we actually improved upon things, and we did it at scale, and now as I live in sort of the civilian world and I see these little pilots and I see people doing these initiatives, one of the things that's definitely a distinction from what we did in the military is that we were able to do it at scale and we saw impact. And that doesn't happen often. That was what was very unique for us. And I wonder if you would talk about maybe just briefly about your experience and what you witnessed throughout the pandemic response and maybe Project Salus, for example.
Oh yeah, well that's such a good example to turn to, and you're right. Back to the feeling we had of it. We get used to in our military careers improving the status quo. You don't get many opportunities to completely disrupt the status quo. So it did feel like we were in a team of people that were trying to change the way the department operated. It's no feeling like that. And that's why I think we all have this impression of this team we had built, the plank holders of the Jake. But so 6 months before I retired, of course, COVID had hit. I made my last trip to talk to some people at NATO and the European Union, as a matter of fact, about AI. Came back from that and things began to shut down everywhere, including the Department of Defense. And here we are at this Jake, new organization, still just trying to get up and going. And we're suddenly put into telework, remote work, which could have shut us down because this is AI and it's hard and it's different. And how do you get your job done? But what it did was forge even closer relationships in the team. And the example you're getting at, now just very briefly talk about this, is what we call Project Salus. So COVID hits and we're already into this remote environment. And I don't know what we could do related to COVID, but the team comes to me, including you, and says, boss, we have something we think we can help with. U.S. Northern Command and the National Guard Bureau are both struggling. They have data everywhere, but they don't know how to do the data in a way that says, the example we were dealing with was, I have a supply of X over here. I have a demand for X here, but I have a demand for Y that doesn't match that supply of Y somewhere else. How do we help with that? And that could be everything from vaccines to milk on the counter of a supermarket. And so the team of people came together remotely, for the most part, in a cross-functional way that involved everything from you and your team as the medical experts of all this, the data scientists, the data architects, the compute people, the lawyers, the ethicists, the people doing the responsible AI, and said, this is going to be a challenge, but we're in. We're going to do this. And I can't remember. I always get the number a little bit off. But at one point, we had over 100 different sources of data coming in. And not all of it was going to be solved with AI. Just normal process automation was incredibly beneficial. But a lot of it, we began to figure out you could do things with AI. And this, to me, was one of the things that just was to walk out on that note when everybody came together and says, we want to help. We know this is in the United States. So there were some concerns about, U.S. privacy issues and HIPAA, PII, as they say, personally identifiable information. But we worked our way through most of that. The policy people objected to some of it, but the lawyers were okay with it. And we were able to demonstrably show what we could do to improve operations for both Northern Command, who runs, operations for the United States of America for the military, and then the National Guard Bureau, because the National Guard was at that state level. And this was all happening in those states. Every state was dealing with this a little bit differently. And what they needed to help was to see the big picture across the entire country. And it really was a fascinating. It was tough, but it was Salas is one of those high points that it wasn't a warfighting initiative, but it was one that could make a difference in people's lives, and truly in people's lives.
Absolutely. And thank you again for your leadership. One of the things that I mentioned earlier is that you have this unique ability to both enable and empower us. And I think that's what great leaders do. They create leaders underneath them, and everybody, felt like we had your support to go out and solve problems. And you gave us the direction and sort of the guidance, and we ran with it. And we think about, again, smarter healthcare with AI. We talked about some of these unique challenges that are certainly ripe for applications that could solve some of these problems, not only our own experience. But again, thinking back to like those people that are probably listening now, they're thinking to ourselves, okay, these two military guys, they had this great experience at the Jake, they were at this historic organization, it's evolved, AI is a little bit more mature. Because of what we had in terms of perspective, and I'd like to ask this question, and where you've seen AI sort of evolve in your time from leaving the military to where you are now, and all of the boards you sit on, the work that you do, and your own just off, because you've seen this evolution. Where do you think we're going in the next 5 to 10 years in AI in general, and then maybe specifically perhaps in healthcare based on your experience?
Yeah, well, I start with saying somebody like you who carries that zeal, the passion for the profession of healthcare and medicine is so unbelievably central to all of this that's going to happen over the next few years. So your experiences, and you're right, it may be seen by some people in a military context, but I can't think of anything more fungible between healthcare and the military and healthcare and the broader population, to include this veterans population that we have across the country, which is very large. But having somebody like you bring back your experiences and then sort of encouraging others to take this on. And you and I both know that it's always going to be people that are sort of maybe 2 or 3 generations below us that are already embracing this. They just need that support from above to be able to convince the leadership of anywhere, hospital, VA, military, whatever it is, to say, we're going to take this on. So what you're doing is as important as anything else, is just having that passion for making a difference. In terms of what do I think over the next 5 years, I wish I could answer that question, Hassan. I just don't know. One of the things when I write about this, and I've been writing quite a bit lately, is the idea of the future being unknowable and unpredictable. But what we can't allow to happen is just the technology to sort of run amok. It needs to be shaped by humans. And in the healthcare side, it means shaped by people like you that understand what it can do, but equally important is what it can't do. And there's still a lot of things that it can't do. What I think we're going to see in the next 5 years is get to the point of much more personal healthcare, which may sound a little contradictory because we're talking about enabled machines and smarter machines. But I think the smarter we make machines, the idea of having more human-centered healthcare is not only possible, but it's the vision we should keep for everybody, to say it won't be an impersonal business. It will be more personal because you'll get that one-on-one interaction, I think, better and maybe a little bit faster in the future. The other part that I would say in this, because we're seeing it play out as we speak today, is AI used to come up with new medicines, chemicals and biopharmacy and genetics engineering, which does introduce some concerns as well as some opportunities. But I think all of that is going to be explosive growth in the next 5 years. And to have cures for certain maybe diseases that we never expect possible in our lifetimes, maybe they are possible because, one, you understand more about what the disease root causes are, but also the medicines that can be developed to go after those. So I think we're going to see a way to help humans out that it's hard to fathom right now because it is going to change so fast.
That's a great vision for the future. And I think it's one that excites me for sure. I've always been passionate about this. I remain passionate. And of course, because, especially you, sir, where you've led in these various capacities and you've directed this great organization called the Jake. As a leader, you always have to paint this vision and show the people sort of where they should go to the mountaintop. What's the art of the possible? But as a fighter pilot, it's your core, and as me as a cardiac surgeon, where you're sort of holding the bounds of life and death in your hands sometimes, we also appreciate, and I know you know this even more than anybody, you also know that as a leader, you have to also weigh the risks of anything, right? Any mission, there's an incalculable number of permutations about how things could go. And while on the one hand, as a leader, you need to sort of give everyone this vision of almost unicorns and rainbows and things happening, you also know that the practical reality, as you stated very early on, through all of your commands, you've seen everything that could go wrong, or at least, you've been exposed to a lot of those things. So when you think about that, right, again, for our audience, they're sitting here thinking to themselves, yes, I'm a leader. I'm someone that's in the organization. I can take this initiative. I can go out and make smarter healthcare with AI. What do you tell that person about how to mitigate risk? And again, this is not anything to do with AI. This is just from your vast experience as a leader and just the practical knowledge of leading people and knowing that there's always risk. And how do you mitigate that and apply it in this context with this new technology?
For every opportunity, there are, of course, are going to be risks associated with it, and which is why we even had, I bet some people, and maybe everybody on this call is listening, unless they're familiar with Jake, does not understand, we actually had AI ethics principles signed out before I retired, and then they turned those into an implementation plan, because you need those to govern the risks piece of this. And you have to evaluate those risks through things like test and evaluation. The idea of going very fast is okay up to a point, but going so fast that you forget about your ethical responsibilities, the morality of what you're trying to do, and what the impact could be on the broader societal side of the equation is a bad combination. You have to keep both of those together at all times. We're seeing examples of this. And if you were in a Harvard dorm room 20 years ago, you had no idea that this thing called Facebook was going to explode into this global phenomenon that has some real downsides in terms of people's health, mental health, teenagers' mental health, and online bullying and things that are happening. So to the core, you still have to keep the AI ethics principles in mind. Whatever those principles are, however you're grounded in all of this, I think you have to consider not just what might go wrong, but what are the worst possible outcomes. Based on that worst possible outcome, you start working your way back what we might call risk mitigation measures. We want to take steps to make sure that worst outcome cannot happen. And then you sort of adjust as you learn more and more. You may be able to push a little bit harder or faster in a certain direction. But there's still a lot of unknowns about this technology. So there is a reason to say the precautionary principle. Be very careful with these new technologies that you don't move so fast that you're going to get these unintended, not only unintended consequences, but unpredictable consequences, because we don't know how these things are going to interact with each other when they get very, very sophisticated models over the next few years. So just like you do every day, Hassan, and you're in the world of medicine and healthcare and surgery, you have ethics principles that you abide by. There's a morality piece of it that cannot go away. It's what makes us special as humans that you can't code into a software program. So I think that's what you need help sometimes understanding what those worst outcomes could be, and then sort of take steps to make sure that those are not going to happen.
I think that's great, great guidance, and I was indirectly wanting to evoke that, because one of the things that was not necessarily abundantly apparent or clear when we engaged with our stakeholders with the Jake was that we did have this whole other operation that was running in parallel with everything that we were going and moving out for. I mean, I think, did a very good job of introducing this concept of, responsible AI to, sort of the conversation almost at every level. And I think, I'm proud to say that, those that were here at the Jake in the very beginning and the new organization were really, advocates for that and vanguards of that very principle that you're espousing now.
It was central. It was central to our everyday lives, even though it didn't get the attention that the sort of killer robots attention that grabbed headlines.
Right. I had the fortune of going to Consumer Electronics Show recently, and I got to sit on a panel moderated on global health and AI, and one of the things that came up was our experience at the Jake with Project Solace and talking about the great benefits we had there. But seeing all of that technology and sort of what the future holds, it was not lost on me that it's really easy sometimes to get lost in the sort of the bells and the whistles and the technology and the blinking lights and everything that everyone's talking about, and then lose sort of this central component. So there's a comment that I've been very fond of adopting. I've sort of like interpreted it for the present time here, but it talks about the technology, right? About how AI will in fact impact everything, and it will change everything, and we're seeing that now. And you've talked about that, and you've espoused that, except for the things that matter most, and the things that matter most are going to be up to us. And I think that's really what you were getting at with the core of being human. So with that, and as we come to the close here, sir, how are you spending your time? What is the human thing that you're doing to continue yourself and to grow and to continue to contribute and serve in a way that I know you can only do?
Well, so when I retired, I went back and got another master's degree thanks to the GI Bill, which took me a while. So I did that for 2 years. And since then, everything I do has some tie into AI and national security is the best way I can say it. The hard part, as I'm sure it is for you, is keeping current. I'll read half dozen Substack articles every morning just to try to keep up what happened in the last 24-hour period, never mind the last 6 months or a year. So it's hard. It's hard to keep up because it is moving that fast. And what I try to do is again, step back a little bit, say, what does this really mean for society? So I am thinking about those broader societal impacts of these technologies, not just the technology themselves, but what do you do with these technologies? So I guess I'd say that everything I'm doing is staying very closely linked to this technology called AI, but really what it means for national security, because there's so much more that still needs to be done.
Well, General Shanahan, thank you so much, not only for being a guest on our inaugural podcast with Smarter Healthcare and AI, but giving me the opportunity, giving me the guidance, your leadership. I would be remiss if I don't share this publicly, but I can't resist. So I'm a Navy guy, and you were by far one of the best bosses I've ever worked for in my whole career. And I always kind of, joke with my Navy colleagues. That's, I had an Air Force general that was awesome to work for. So thank you, sir, for being that example. And
well, I can assure you were the single best cardiothoracic surgeon that's ever worked for me. But in all seriousness, we were a team together. That's why I appreciate you saying enable and empower, because those were the two things I thought every day about. But it needed the people to go do, and you were one of the people that not only did it, but are carrying on, carrying the flame, the torch, whatever you want to say. So I want to thank you for your leadership, which is the leadership that really got us moving a lot faster in an area that I wouldn't have been thinking about, to be honest with you, unless you had come in. So thanks, Hassan, and congratulations on your inaugural podcast and the books you're writing and everything you've done. So it was a wonderful time to spend with you.
You're very welcome, sir. And that will do it for the first episode of Smarter Healthcare with AI. Thank you so much. Please make sure to leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss any of our future exciting episodes. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
This has been Smarter Healthcare with AI. If you'd like to find out how to bridge the gap between medical experts and tech innovators and discover how AI can make us healthier and more human, go to Tetteh.com. Smarter Healthcare with AI with Dr. Hassan Tetteh is a production of Forbes Books.